All right, welcome to the W3C WEBRTC working group meeting on February 18th, 2025. My name is Jana Vabruri, and my co-chair is Guido Urdaneta. First item on the agenda is a sad one. So we're saddened by the recent passing of our co-chair and friend, Bernard Boba. He normally does this intro. Bernard co-chaired this working group since 2017. But his contributions to WebRTC go back further than that. He authored and co-authored numerous internet drafts and RFCs on networking, Wi-Fi, most famously IEEE 802.11, NAS traversal, and various real-time communication protocols. He was an active participant and often chair or editor in various IETF groups as well, including RTC Web, AVT Core, and WebTrans. He also co-authored ORTC, which was an influence on WebRTC. In the W3C, he was also an editor for specs like Web Codecs, Web Transport, WebRTC, of course, and SVC. In short, he served many years in leadership and editor roles on drafts and specifications around WebRTC and media technologies, helping to standardize how browsers handle real-time audio and video today. His vision and foresight helped to continually improve its quality and low latency. Bernard, you will be missed, and I ask that we observe a moment of silence. Thank you. So with that, we'll continue our meeting. We're banned by the W3C IPR policy. And the patent policy, only people and companies listed here are allowed to make substantive contributions. Today, we'll cover topics like media capture main, WebRTC stats, and capture surface control. We also have, you'll see our future meetings are March 25th and April 15th. Here you'll see our meeting info and link to latest drafts. Just because something is in a repo doesn't mean it has a backing of WWDC. That depends on call for consensus. We are all passionate, but we abide by the code of conduct for WWDC. And let's keep the conversation cordial and professional. We're using Google Meet controls to raise and lower hand to get into the speaker queue. And with that, we need to find a scribe. And this is the slide for document status that I mentioned. Is there anyone willing to do scribe or note taking? Just write down resolutions, that sort of thing. We don't have Dom here today, so we do actually need someone to volunteer for that.
Yeah, I'll take notes today.
Okay, great. Thank you, Guido. All right, so with that, we're starting with a grab bag of issues. And the first couple of ones are from me, so I'll keep talking. For media capture main, we have 3 issues, and then 2 issues in WebRTC stats, which I believe are from FIPO. And then, so diving right into the first issue. This is media capture main issue 1020. What is the order of events being? What are the order of events being fired for track clone? And the background here is that order events like muted and unmuted can happen on many tracks that are clones. And their order is observable, but the spec doesn't always say what the order is. This can create subtle interoperability paper cuts for applications. So a proposal here is to settle on a per thread track creation order, which is deterministic per thread. one question that came up is, what about media stream track transfer? Doesn't it throw a wrench in it? And the answer there, we believe, is no, because transfer, when you transfer an object to a worker, for example, from main thread, it really creates a new object in a clone and destroy fashion. If I were a magician and I teleport a bird, the original bird dies, but you just don't see it. But there's actually two. So which means that the objects don't actually travel, they stay in place in a detached state on the thread they were created on. So this actually leaves creation order per deterministic within a thread. Anyone have any thoughts on this? Slam dunk? Any objections?
Have you verified that current behavior actually conforms to this?
I have not, no.
Could you please do that before merging? I mean, I very much dislike imposing requirements on APIs that that make things that used to be conformant non-conformant. And
Agreed. Yes.
And if we decide that it's important enough to do, then we should do it. But if it's either not important or there's one way that everyone follows, then life becomes much easier.
No, that's good feedback. Thank you. And I think so. I'm hearing that we can go ahead with the PR, but we would have to write web platform tests, and we'll have to see how if it doesn't match broadly, at least some browsers, we would have to revisit. Does that sound fair? Cool. All right. So I think the resolution here is to proceed with the PR and with testing to make sure that existing behavior matches. All right. Next slide. So this is also media capture main 2028. Oh, sorry, 1028. And this was from looking into track order and event order. Begs a larger question of, is it time to revisit the revisit and document get user media track order? And here the media capture main spec begins by saying the tracks of a media stream are stored in a track set. This track set must contain the media stream track objects that correspond to the tracks of the stream. And then it continues, the relative order of the tracks in the set is user implementation defined, basically. And the API will never put any requirements on the order, which is great. And it says the proper way to find a specific media stream track object in the set is to look it up by its ID. Which is nice to say, but I don't know that I've ever actually done that. Usually there's only ever just one audio track or one video track. And we have these nice methods, get video tracks and get audio tracks, and then you get the first item in that array. That is not always true, of course. You can add and remove tracks from streams, and streams are mostly containers these days anyway, so you can have any number of audio tracks and any number of video tracks. But again, most people probably don't do that. But anyways, the spec language here turns out to be very old, and in more modern specs, we have the web platform infra standard, which has some language around sets, and that it basically admonishes us to use ordered sets. And this is the infra spec.wg.org rule 5.1.3 about sets. It says some lists are designated as ordered sets. An ordered set is a list with the additional semantic that it must contain the same item, must not contain the same item twice. And then the note that says almost all cases on the web platform require an ordered set instead of an unordered one, since interoperability requires that any developer exposed enumeration of the set's contents be consistent between browsers. In those cases where order is not important, we still use ordered sets. Implementations can optimize based on the fact that the order is not observable. So that seems to go against the old language we had in mean capture main, and we should probably fix to align with the other specs on this. So a fiddle reveals the GUM order to be audio. If you do call get user media with video true and audio true, in Chrome and Firefox, you'll get back an array if you call get tracks that contains the audio track first and then video track. Safari is the odd one out here. Safari actually sorts them by lexicographical order based on track ID. Track ID being generated ID, UUID, I think. But anyway, that's as close to random as I can think. And Philip also noticed that Adapter.js for a while has tried to correct this to align it with Chrome and Firefox, at least to the level of putting the audio track first always. This all seems needlessly confusing for web developers, so the proposal is to document the audio and video order, at least when it comes to a single audio track and a single video track. And then to update the language about our track set to link to the infraspecs definition of sets. But that would also have some additional consequences on the next slide, which is that if we link to the infraspecs set, which is an ordered set, that actually helps disambiguate how add track works as well. This is stream.addTrack. So right now it says add track to streams track set. So if we change that to append, which would be the right name for an ordered set, then we get some deterministic behavior for both add track and remove track. So here I give an example, which has a link that you can try yourself. And I tried this example in the different browsers. Excuse me. So what I do here is I call get user media with video true and audio true, and I get back an audio track and a video track, not necessarily in that order. So the JavaScript here basically says, give me the first track. So let me go through how the spec, if we do this and it links to the infraspec and consider the set an ordered set, that happens to be what Firefox does. So the first track in this case will be the audio track, audio 1. And then the example here is that we remove that track, in which case in Firefox you're left with video 1 in the track set. And then we add that track back. And now that audio track is at the tail of the array. And then we add a clone of that first track. And now we have video 2, audio 1, audio 3. Now, the logging here is actually logging the kind of the track, but also an index into track IDs that it has seen before. Just because the track IDs are pretty long, and that would be that would mess up the slides quite a bit. So that's just for brevity. Imagine that's a long track ID. Unfortunately, only Firefox implements it like this. Chrome has a different logic, which appears to be to list all audio tracks before all the video tracks, which gives us the same behavior in Firefox for one track of each kind. But once you start adding several tracks, it gets a little confusing. Chrome will then, for instance, do, if we look at the bottom line here, we see we end up with different results. Chrome ends up with audio 1, audio 3, and video 2. And Firefox ends up with video 2, audio 1, audio 3. And Safari is all over the place because even though it has well-defined behavior, for web developers, it ends up to be, the end results ends up being very random, almost perfect random, and probably not what would be best to standardize. So the proposal here is to change the add in the spec to append, link to the input spec, and file necessary bugs on Chrome and Safari. to give deterministic behavior for add track and remove track as well. I think we can look at this as two proposals. The previous slide, can we agree on audio and video being the right order for a single track per kind? And can we agree on an algorithm that is deterministic for track manipulation, basically? Thoughts?
So historical note, which explains the why the Chrome behavior is not strange at all. And when we invented MediaStream, it had the separate sections for audio and video tracks. The getter was a late addition to the spec. So internally, I think at least the Chrome implementation still has that implementation, and I suggest we keep it like that. It's logical.
So you're proposing the Chrome behavior, the standardize that.
Yes, I mean,
and that behavior is to
given
list
the
all audio
history,
track.
then it's it's quite logical.
Well, my concern with that, thank you, and I see Philip on the queue as well. I'll get on the queue. Philip? You're muted if you're talking. Oh. Did Philip drop? Okay. Philip, are you there?
Yes, but I think his mic is not working. Philip, you're listed as muted. Let me see. Open the chat.
Well, while we wait for Philip, I'm a bit concerned about that order. It doesn't seem. It might be confusing web developers that call add track and remove track a lot.
It's certainly I mean, at some point we actually seem to have redefined turn the description into something that conflated the two track sets into one internal track set, and we can disambiguate that. I think part of the reason why we revisited that one was that we were thinking that there could be a third type of track, but we're 10 years down the road from there, so it doesn't seem to be that we will ever realize smell-o-vision on WebRTC.
Right.
Okay, does my audio work now?
Yes.
Woohoo! Okay, sorry about that. It's always. I think the main reason we have a problem here is that get tracks is used with add track, and people typically iterate. And we even have an example showing the legacy add stream implementation, which relies on the get tracks order. The problem we have is that we are confusing web developers in the cases where, as you point out, they remove tracks and then re-add them, but I don't think they add them to the peer connection. So I would say we just go with what Chrome does and be done with it.
All right, let me see. Any other opinions? Well, I would still propose, I think my preference would still be Firefox's implementation here, because I think it would be quite confusing otherwise.
The Q2. So my proposal is to not change anything. since I don't see that conforming with a new guideline a valid reason to break compatibility with all the existing implementations. And so far, the spec has been this way for years, and all implementations are conformant. There's no order, and there's no guaranteed order if you try different implementations, and just making two implementations non-compliant, doesn't matter which order we choose. I mean, two will become non-compliant, and then when they're changed, then probably some application will depend on that order and will break and will cause more troubles than what we're trying to fix. So my proposal is, like, at best add a note that maybe, okay, this is not the way apps are done nowadays, but for historical reasons, this is done this way, that there's no order, and just keep all implementations spec compliant, and let all applications rely on the existing behavior that is also spec compliant, and be done with it.
Thank you. So I think that is my least favorite option. But the problem, though, is that there's a bit of a logical fallacy here, I appear, is that if we're worried about breaking people, I almost guarantee that nobody's implemented this. Nobody's written an app that depends on each browser's order when they're different. So part of interop is to, and also the guidance here from the infraspec, is to try to align behavior so that it does match across browsers. That's always better. It's never worse, right? So if I would rather try to standardize some behavior than no behavior, and I think so. That's my my first preference would be standardized Firefox. My second preference would be standardized Chrome. My least preference would be to leave it alone. Just with my chair hat off. Guido?
Yeah, with my Chrome hat on, I would say that I would be okay with the standardizing on the Chrome behavior. I would oppose any other change, but with my co-chair hat on, I would say that I think it's better to leave things as they are. I mean, sometimes things are not perfect historically, but the consequences of changing them are worse. I'm pretty sure that there will be some application that uses primarily one browser that will break if we make this change just to conform to some recommendation, and then that change will have to be rolled back, because breaking the web is a lot worse than not conforming with an application. We have seen that with several other changes that have been made to spec, and yeah, we are not going to make the same mistake again, or we should not make the same mistake again.
Philip?
So for Safari's track order, we have evidence that developers are actually confused by it. But for this one, do we have any evidence that this is an actual problem? In particular, when it comes to adding the tracks in the order, for example, after the last add track in your example. Is it a practical problem?
Well, I think we don't have any reports of it, but I think following good guidance here, I think the thing I take issue with is that we talk about breaking people, and I think in standards we try to make sure that things work across browsers, and if we're talking about breaking people who don't work across browsers, that's pitting. I'm a bit concerned about the people we're worried about breaking. It sounds like, to me, interoperability should come ahead of breaking browser-specific behavior. But that's my opinion. Harald?
This is about imposing new requirements on browsers. So we're entering we're contemplating entering a state where people who read the spec, if there are any, will believe one thing and go to their browser and see another thing, because the browsers will not magically turn compliant overnight. So we should do that only when there's a clear benefit to developers.
Well, I think there is
making
a benefit.
browsers non-compliant for in the interest of spec purity is not the right order of constituencies.
So I would say that it's not about spec purity. It's about the existing spec says that you should not rely on the order ever as a web developer or a browser. And so we're improving that language. So if we assume that people are following that recommendation of not relying on the order, then we're not breaking anyone. I mean, overly simplified, of course. So it doesn't seem that we would break anyone by changing it either. Right? So, and I think, speaking for Firefox, I think just because we don't have reports over confusion or breakage today, because someone is following how it works in a different browser, doesn't mean we won't have it tomorrow. So I also think it's probably fine to leave the spec alone and say that I also recognize that Firefox can change its behavior regardless of what the spec says here. So I guess that's also an option. But it would be nicer if we decided to align with Chrome's behavior. I'm sorry, there's no one from Safari here today to check with as well. Then perhaps we could. It sounds like Chrome would be in favor of standardizing the Chrome behavior. Is that still right?
I would say that
bad behavior.
I would say that Chrome is not opposed on standardizing on Chrome behavior, obviously.
Okay.
But we would oppose forcing a new behavior. So I personally would leave the spec as is, but a compromise I can accept is changing the spec to mandate Chrome's behavior. But yeah, of course, for that, I think we should also listen to the opinion from the Safari people.
Okay. Philip?
Is there a middle ground where we do the Chrome behavior for the first audio and video track and then impose the order after that? Or is it just going to make everyone unhappy?
So you're saying, going back a slide, you mean mandate the audio video order here?
On the next slide, audio and video for the first track of the kind, and after that, it's addition order.
Okay. That would be great.
Propose that in the issue, and then we discuss there.
Okay. That would also give us time to get Safari's input.
Yes.
I like
One
that.
additional item is that we should probably change the legacy add stream node in the WEBRTC PC spec to avoid that problem.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you. If that works for everyone, I think we can go to the next slide. Yes, Guido?
You said that works for everyone. What particularly you say that works for everyone?
Well, I think we've gotten as far as we can go in a meeting, and I think Philip suggested proposing a compromise on the issue. That would also give us time to get feedback from Safari people. So no resolution at this time, I think.
Okay. Yeah, if there's no resolution, that's fine. To answer Philip's question of whether this is an acceptable compromise or it would make everyone happy, I think it's the latter.
Sorry, the latter.
It will make everyone unhappy. At least it will make me unhappy.
Okay. Okay. All right. So then, in that case, there's no resolution, and we'll try to find feedback from Safari. Excuse me, around maybe standardizing on Chrome behavior. Okay. All right. I'm not hearing any objections so far. So let's go to the next issue. So media capture main 1027 was an issue filed by someone to question how to interact with a device that doesn't have a fixed capability. Again, there's some old language in the spec for a constrainable pattern that says source capabilities are effectively constant. Applications should be able to depend on a specific source having the same capabilities for any browsing session. However, this appears a bit outdated, specifically with virtual cameras like OBS that allow users to reconfigure what's delivered on the fly, or at least once per capture. And we also, over in screen sharing, we have a reuse of this constraint model for get display media that says, for instance, of the width constraint or capability. As a capability, max must reflect the display surface's width, which in practical terms, when capturing a window in Safari, updates live in response to the user resizing the captured window. So I did not observe that behavior in Chrome. So the proposal here is to strike the above sentence that says the capabilities are constant. This would allow user agents to do two things, which is to have get capabilities return the most updated configuration. And also, it would also resolve the contradiction in get display media. Thoughts? Gideon?
I support this proposal.
Great. Any objections?
I support the proposal.
Great, thank you. Sounds like everyone, two people propose support and no lack of support. That's great. Thank you. And then we can go to the next slide. This, I believe, is Pippo.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we added the ICE candidate username fragment to the candidate stats in PR 611. And the problem we have now is that with peer reflexive candidates, that means we get something that is coming from the network, that is an authenticated string coming from the stun packet, but it can act as an unencrypted side channel. There is a theoretical attack. I haven't done it in practice, but people are looking into that to try to avoid signaling servers, which I don't think we want to support. On selected candidate pair, it's fine. So I would propose we do something similar to what we do for addresses. Do not expose the username fragment on the stats for remote candidates unless it is known by signaling. This is consistent with the address, but we run into the problem that we never found any agreement on whether this should be an empty string or simply missing for address. And we should at least be consistent with whatever we come up with. Thoughts?
That seems good to me. I think I support it.
Harald, do you have an opinion?
I think we should I think we should prevent people from reading it. The fragments, yes. So I have no idea what about how to resolve the web compat issue.
Yeah. So we just agreed to disagree on that one and hope the developers will figure it out.
Oh, we should just in general we should just pick one. If if we're breaking people who read that fragment anyway, then we should pick one.
I think on address it was more difficult because people relied on address more. I think for username fragment it's still relatively recent.
Yeah, we're disappearing it. So the shape of the hole we're disappearing it into is we can decide that. We didn't disappear it before, so there's no backwards compatibility to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
Any other opinions, objections? So did I understand that there's support for this, or how was there some concern?
There's support for removing the ability I support the do not expose unknown username fragments to stats.
Great. All right. Sounds like we have our solution.
Thank you.
All right. Next slide.
Good. This is actually a feature, and the proposal is to expose for video the peak signal to noise ratio on the outbound RTP statistics. The problem this solves is that QP, the quantization parameter, is codec dependent, so you cannot use it to compare codecs and do A/B tests that tell you whether codec A or codec B is better. PSNR solves that by operating on the actual source image. And we have even a paper on that by some of my coworkers at Meta who wrote it up. It looks great in production. It behaves as you would expect. The problem is PSNR needs to be computed, unlike QP, which is a parameter that is an input. On every frame, it's too expensive to do. We do it once every second, roughly. So for stats, the proposal is to leave the frequency of measurement up to the implementation, which means we have a counter for how often it has been measured. And then we expose a set of 3 components for each plane. We do have enough support for implementations when it comes to all the software encoders and a couple of hardware encoders on various platforms as well. So
So I don't necessarily see any problem with this, but I might need to check with other Mozilla folks. Are there any other proponents? All right.
Just a caveat that PSNR and visual and human impression of quality do not match up more than at a 6.6 correlation or something like that. So yes, it's a measure. That's the best I can say. And it's sometimes, I mean, huge changes in PSNR usually correlate with changes in quality.
mm-hmm.
But small changes in PSNR do not. So just be warned about that.
Yes. Yes, I think that matches what we've seen and what is described in the paper as well.
All right, I'm not hearing any other comment. Just ready for PR. All right, that sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. All right, so we are 15 minutes ahead, I think, which is good. We can jump into captured surface control, and we'll have a little more time to discuss. So the breakdown here is, I think, first I have 20 minutes, and then Elon has 20 minutes to discuss two views of captured surface control. So I go first, and I think the idea here was that I found a lot of issues on captured surface control, but I've not had an opportunity to present a holistic vision of that. So this will be that attempt. And I'll focus mostly on zooming. Sorry, not on zooming. I'll focus mostly on scrolling, not zooming. So this is with my chair hat off. So this is my pitch. So the captured scrolling use case is what I'll focus most on, which I think is a great feature where the presenter interacts with the preview tile to scroll its live rendered tab capture. And I want to give kudos to Google here. I think this is a really great and natural feature. Much like the laser pointed, I'm dating myself, but back when people did physical presentations, being able to point to screen, I think this is, so my prediction here, my crystal ball, is that people will come to expect this behavior, and that once expectations have adjusted, asking extra permission will seem quaint, and people will ask, why can't browsers just do it? And so I think I would like to prepare for that time to make sure we have the right shape of API and behavior. So that means scoping the captured scrolling use case. Again, the user interacts with the preview tile to scroll its live rendered tab capture. I think we need to narrow down what we need to make to have that, what is included in that use case and what is out of scope for that use case. So I would say this is my list that I've tried to gather from different people. I think one, it must work with mouse wheel today and touchpads tomorrow. But hit zone is always going to be limited to the area of the last frame rendered in the preview tile. And there's a distinction there that came up in that it's not necessarily the bounding box of the preview tile, but it's where the actual frame is being rendered as well, which can change in edge cases, but shouldn't really change in the common cases. Now, this preview tile might be a preview video element or a preview canvas. We'll get back to those definitions. We need to allow overlays for annotations or speaker notes. So both annotations on the surface, but also elements like speaker notes that are on top and have their own interact the way they would normally by scrolling independently, for instance, if there's a scrollable list of speaker notes. In the future, we also want to support capture transforms so that the output is transformed using Medium Track Processor or Video Track Generator to add things like watermarks or otherwise modify the presentation. So what's out of scope, I think, is scrolling from arbitrary hit zones unrelated to the rendered preview. So the next couple of slides, I'm going to try to nail down the behavior, both around coordinates and input consumption order. And two, where does the method go? How do we find the correct source? And how do we solve overlays? So starting down with nailing down behavior for the coordinates. End users will perceive themselves as interacting with the preview tile. That means user agents need to know where the preview tile is to translate coordinates, which are relative to the area of rendered video frames inside its bounding box. Now, my claim here is that the existing API fails here by limiting the website to provide either the preview tile or the overlay. And that means user agents needlessly rely on the website to maintain alignment between the overlay and the preview area, or the illusion of interaction between the user and its user agent falls apart. To me, this is error-prone and not robust. I think what we want is the middle behavior here, where the coordinates, both scale and offset, are determined from the location of the preview tile, not the overlay, to match up with the desired behavior. For instance, if you capture something like Stack Overflow, the neat thing about this feature is that you can target subframes and scroll subframes independently in a capture. Very nice feature. So the second thing to nail down is the input consumption order. And so here I did a little test. And it turns out that all browsers implement scrolling as a default action today. You have a link there, janiver.github.io/dummy/test wheel, where you can see that you can have a scrollable text field, a field of text that's scrolled and constrained using CSS. And you can use prevent default to prevent that scrolling action. So basically, websites can cancel it with event.prevent default in an event lister. This lets websites consume the input for other purposes, which becomes important later as we'll talk about overlays. The current spec language fails here because it uses browser pros to basically create event listeners under the hood, which unfortunately has observable side effects. One of them is that event prevent default doesn't work anymore because it's not implemented as a default behavior. You could rely on event stop propagation instead, which affects other event listeners, but then that is unreliable because it'll depend on whether JavaScript added its event handlers before or after they called the method where the browser added its event handler. So this is issued 67. I propose we change that language to basically follow more standard ways of consuming input. Next slide. So issue 45 is about where does the method go? And here I would argue that the method seems natural where the interaction happens, which is on the preview tile. Websites can selectively enable this use agent feature of the preview tile. And here is my proposed naming as well. It used to be called forward gestures, which made more sense on the capture controller, that name. If we put it on the video element on the canvas, forward gestures to where. So it might be more, a better name open to bike setting might be control captured surface, and you can set that to true or false. And you can pass in an options object. Now this is a compromise. We're using a method instead of an attribute that was first proposed because it fits permission better. It's actually not unusual to have the same method on different classes. For instance, capture stream, which lives on video element, audio element, and also on canvas. In this case, we wouldn't do it. Control capture surface on audio element wouldn't make any sense. So there's only two places here. An API like this means that the use agents are actually free to add support for wheel and or touch events as well for tablets. Now, screen capture is not super popular on tablets yet, but I don't know about Windows tablets, but it's something we still need to prepare for. Another benefit that this is not limited to one preview tile, which the existing API is. For instance, we mentioned transforms. You can imagine a web page that transforms its capture using a video stream type processor or video track generator. Maybe it's using AI to translate slides to a different language, stuff like that. And then before and after comparison, where you could scroll either one, might be neat. This will also seem simple and robust. It's impossible to pass in the wrong controller or overlay. And we'll talk more about overlay separately. So one problem with this, you might have noticed, is that we don't pass in the controller anymore. So how do we find the correct source? This is actually a benefit, is that the use agent, not the web developer, locates the source servicing the preview. We don't actually need the controller, we need to find the source. So for preview video element, it's quite simple. You'd get the source objects, video tracks, source. For preview canvas, I think it would be desirable that scrolling requires a browser video frame recently drawn to it. This would help us get the right offsets and coordinates we need as well. So the idea here is that the user agent basically taints the canvas when the video frames from a browser source are drawn to it. For instance, you can imagine an internal slot like a source ID, for instance. In the future, this could also be expanded to video track generator tracks, where the user agent can reuse the same canvas taint mechanism to taint created frames and queued on the video track generator, which you can manipulate by manipulating the video frame itself. You can use an off-screen canvas to draw and on it and do standard manipulations that way. In any case, this looks very complicated, but the idea is that the user agent is in a good place to figure this out. It's important to remember, I think, that the common case is super trivial because you'll just do one capture and likely just one preview. There's probably just going to be a one preview tile that calls control captured surface true, and browsers can just make that work. So the rest here is really about edge cases, and at some point, I would argue that if the user agent can't figure that out, then the end user likely can't either, and scrolling shouldn't work. So here's the interesting one. How do we solve overlays? I think the simplest solution is to use a preview canvas, then implement annotations in the same canvas. No need for a separate overlay. But that being said, we probably also want to allow interactions with other elements overlapping a preview video element or a preview canvas, such as an initially transparent overlay canvas or independently scrollable boxes of sticky speaker notes. So interactive overlays are a general problem, not specific to capture, is what I'm arguing here. And I did another test page that you can try if you want to copy it from the slide deck here. And if you run this in Safari, you will see some interesting behavior. This is an overlay that decides to either consume events or forward them to the element it overlays. You register a wheel event listener, and you have a checkbox to prevent default and forward. So if you check the forward box, you basically clone the event and you dispatch it to the element that you know you're above. And this actually works in Safari. If you try this in Safari, you can actually scroll using the mouse wheel, whether you're over the scroll box or even the overlapping red area. Now, in Chrome and Firefox, we reject the synthetic events in this case, but that is a choice. The next slide. I mean, I should go back and say that choice, it's possible this is a bug in Safari. It'd be good if we have more input from Apple here. Because if this box were not transparent, you might question whether it actually should scroll that box. So that's probably also why Chrome and Firefox rejected synthetic events here. But the point is that that's a choice that we can make. For instance, we could, if we wanted to, make the preview tiles that have captured surface control on sensitive to forwarding from overlays like in Safari. And this might allow us to write overlays that you can draw on and also contain elements that do not forward, for instance, like scrollable speaker notes. And it uses the same forwarding mechanism by forwarding to the underlying element. Now, the user agent, we would have language here because we want to make sure that this can't be exploited. But it turns out that it doesn't seem that hard to require that user agents must validate synthetic events by making sure they match real events, recent real events that have the same timestamp and absolute coordinates before it will allow you to actually scroll the tab. This is also where user agents, we can add in language that will allow user agents to mitigate clickjacking, for instance, by gauging transparency. But that's a whole, the immediate proposal is that we still require permission for this, so we have some time to improve on that. Alternatively, if we think forwarding is too onerous, US could actually could just take the input, because US are in fact in control very much So they could steal any unused input in its hit zone from all overlapping elements, unless the website prevents it. This actually matches how websites today, this idea that the JavaScript needs to go first, matches how websites today consume touch events. Because wheel events are actually simpler to solve than touch events, because with touch events, for wheel events, you can basically triage based on type alone. But for touch events, you can't do that because it might be an app decision of when the application thinks the user's touch is the beginning of a draw gesture or a scrolling gesture. And again, today they use event prevent default to make this decision. Lastly, should any unaddressed overlay needs surface or transform situations appear where the user agent can't somehow locate the previous source, we'll always have the option to extend the option subject as needed. That means if all else fails, we're not stuck here. We can still pass in a controller and or an overlay with these APIs. But that seems unnecessary today. So to wrap up, benefits here of this approach, an API, is cleaner. There's an on-off API where the interactive feature happens. It's error safe because it's harder to accidentally forward gestures to the wrong capture. It's scalable and works with multiple previews. It's idiomatic, consistent with extensions, existing precedents for extensions in media capture from DOM. It's expansive. We can work with both wheel and touch events, and it's use case scoped more narrowly. We have more narrowly focused behavior targeted specifically at the use case. That means it's actually a less powerful feature because we're limiting how the web site can use it or misuse it, abuse it. And that makes it more possible to remove permission in the future. The cons I've listed is that it's a bit more work for browsers up front, and there might be edge cases that we haven't explored where this might be tricky. And that's it. So I think we can now open up either to discussions or we can have Elad go with his 20 minutes. Do we have any preference?
I think it's better that if Elad goes and then we do all the discussion afterwards. So
Yeah, okay, let's do that.
both views.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And is it okay if I take over the presentation just while I'm presenting, just to make it easier, not request other people to change? Any objections?
No, that's
Awesome.
great.
Let me try that. Awesome. Thank you very much. So I'm Elad. I'm here representing Google, and we proposed and implemented captured surface control as an origin trial in Chrome, and everybody is very welcome to give it a try, file feedback. We're very interested to hear what you think. Captured surface control comprises two parts. One of them is zoom control, one of them is scroll control, and today we're only talking about scrolls. So I'll just start, and apologies if I repeat any of our just a tiny little bit, but I would like to just set the stage by making sure that everybody is still aligned on the use case, and then I'm gonna proceed from there. So the use case is that a user is interacting with a web application, and often, not always, but typically it would be a video conferencing tool, such as the one we're using right now, or any other tool. And sometimes the user is going to start capturing another tab, like I'm doing right now. And then the user might want to keep on interacting with the video conferencing tool, right? Because there is a lot of stuff that's built directly into that tool. You can see other people's reactions, right? You can see their videos, you can mute and mute. You can see your speaker notes sometimes. It depends on the tool, of course, but you can have chat messages. You can manage whether people are allowed in, have to be forced out. You can take polls. There's so many stuff that's built into the actual video conferencing tool that there's really a strong case for the user interacting with that. But the problem is that when the user is capturing something else, often they need to make minor modifications to whatever they're presenting. So zoom is one obvious one. And another one that's really common is when you just need to scroll a little bit to reach the next portion of the page. And you don't want to force the user to switch to a different tab, interact with that, and then switch back. And to that end, we've proposed an API that would allow a web application to forward scroll our wheel gestures from the capturing application to the captured tab. Now, a key part here is that the user is interacting with the captured tab, right? The user is not interacting with some element of the current page. That this might be the mechanism behind the scenes is completely beyond the user. And the user does not need to be taught that. The user should not need to understand that. The user knows that if they're scrolling the tab, that will have a noticeable effect, an actual side effect on the captured tab. It's actually going to change state there. And that's the correct mental model. You're interacting with the captured tab. So to that end, we've designed an API, which I believe is very, very easy to understand and easy to use. Basically, just to remind everybody, there is a new, by now not so new, object called capture controller that you tie to a capture session. So when you start capturing something, there appears a link between the capture controller and the captured content, and this cannot be broken. You can never make that part of a different capture session, which means that there is a one-to-one mapping between this object and whatever you're capturing. So when we interact with that element, we're interacting with the capture tab, and that fits the mental model. So in this case, we just expose a new method called forward wheel, and that accepts an element. Now, maybe we could call it forward wheel from, in which case it would be even clearer because the controller will forward wheel events from the element indicated as the argument. And to use it, super simple. This is actually not even the minimal example. If you can imagine, I could have removed most lines and kept only 2. Because in the simplest use case, you would just have video and you say controller forward wheel from video. But if you also want to support annotations, which is one more reason why the user might want to actually stay in the capturing application, you might have a mostly transparent canvas on top of the video element, and then you can draw the annotations on the canvas and add and remove annotations as the user clicks the canvas. Scroll events will be forwarded through the controller to the captured tab exactly as we want. And I think this is an incredibly simple API service. Now, I want to mention something about generality. In this setup, there's a preview tile, but we should not make unreasonable assumptions or unnecessary assumptions actually about what that video tile is, right? The user doesn't know, and we should support as many options as we can. So some reasonable implementations for that are, you could use a video element, you could use a canvas element, or you could even have a single canvas element encompassing everything the web application shows, right? All of its UX, all of the incoming videos, the local camera, and capture tabs, all of that can be drawn onto a single canvas, and then that's also a valid implementation, right? So these are just 3 different ways that you can implement rendering. And likewise, annotations can be implemented in multiple different ways, right? So one way that we've just explored in the previous slide was that we can have another element that's partially transparent, drawn on top of the rendering element, and you just draw the annotations there. But there are other ways, right? You could, for example, just whatever the rendering element is, each time you draw a frame there, you could use media capture transform, also known as breakout box, to modify every single frame to include the annotations. And that is independent of whether you're drawing those frames on a video or a canvas. And there's one more example. You could, for example, if you're drawing everything on a canvas, every time you put a new frame, you could redraw the annotations directly on that one singular canvas that combines both the preview tile and the annotations. And why am I confusing you with all of these, various options? Because I want to draw a conclusion. And the conclusion is that the API shape should not be tied to specific implementation techniques by the web application. An ideal API shape would be one that could equally serve all of these. And spoiler alert, I believe we have one. Now, I want to step back and explore an edge case. And I want to clarify before I explore this edge case, because it could be a bit triggering. I am not presenting this as yet another use case. This is not one of our core use cases, right? I just want to explore the problem space, take it to its limit, and see what conclusions we can draw about the problem from the edge case. Again, this is not another core use case. So let's start. Imagine that the web application you see at the bottom right is actually a single canvas where you draw everything. On the right side, you've got the center stage. There you have the main pinned video, okay? And if that happens to be a capture tab, then scrolling over that portion is gonna scroll that capture tab, and clicking on that is gonna drive annotations. Now on the left, let's say you've got a Rolodex. You see as many videos as possible, but if you scroll that, you reveal additional videos. And when you click any of these videos, be it a camera feed or a capture tab, clicking that is just going to send it to the center stage, pinning it basically. In that case, what do we learn? The user agent could not guess that clicking on the right side would be different from clicking on the left side, right? It's the web application that knows that. The user agent cannot rush in and help by employing heuristics. If they did, they would most likely fail. And similarly, I want to argue that scrolling is not something that the web application should see on a given element. And even if the web application sees that element and knows exactly where a frame is drawn and knows that that frame comes from a tab that is captured by that application, there is no way for the user agent to guess that the web application and the user want that scrolling to be forwarded. It could be the Rolodex option. It could be the forwarding option. And for a given element, you could even have both of them at the same time. Now, again, this was just a way of motivating that conclusion. This is not another use case. So, to summarize the previous few slides, first, the user interacts with a capture tab, not with the preview tile. I'll just kick this other one. Sorry, don't watch that. Sorry. The user agent is interacting with a capture tab, not the preview tile, and not some rendering element. Second, there is no one-to-one mapping between the rendering element, which is the preview tile, and the capture tab. Where you do have a one-to-one mapping is between the capture tab and the capture controller object. Next, the rendering element could be presenting frames from multiple videos, from multiple capture tabs. Those frames could have already undergone scaling, shifting, transformations of any kind, like changing their chroma levels, and additional content might have been overlaid directly on top before the frame was drawn on top of the element. And last conclusion is that applications must control where gestures are forwarded from and where they are not forwarded from. And that includes being able to specify that just a portion of a rendering element forwards. And we've shown that example just a second ago. So with all of that in mind, I think that the current status quo shape of the API is great. And I'm going to try to motivate that now. So first, what does the web application need to do in order to make use of this API? It just needs to draw the preview tile somewhere. It can do it with any number of videos from any source, peer connection, camera, tab share, and it can split those videos in between any number of rendering elements of any type. Full flexibility. So after it decides how it wants to draw, which could be as simple as a single line, or just video element, it needs to create a target element. That target element can also just be the video element itself, but it can also be a container of the rendering element, or it can be a transparent element overlaid on top of that element. All of these options are possible. Then you just need to invoke a single line consisting of 3 keywords: controller, forward wheel from, target element. That's all, super simple. And if you are in that hypothetical edge case where you're capturing multiple tabs It's simple, because then you've got multiple different controllers, so you just invoke this API call multiple times on different objects. And best of all, the media capture transform doesn't produce any problem, because you're explicitly saying, you as the web developer, explicitly saying from this captured tab. So there is no hard work to be done inferring which tab is actually produced, is actually the source, post some transformations. So that's it, enjoy. And now I'm going to ask you to see the same slide again, actually. Let's look at the simple example here. You've got multiple elements, and you choose the one you want, and you say, I want to forward to that capture tab from this element, and that's all. And in this case, it's with the container, but you could have used the annotation style as well. So now that I've mentioned why I think that the current API shape is great, I want to address a couple of the issues that were filed against the spec. Issue 45, should this method, I'm giving here my summaries. Apologies if the summaries are, not to the liking of whoever filed the issue. I'm doing my best here. So issue summary, should this method be exposed on capture controller or on the rendering element? I believe that I've made a compelling case that this is a feature of the capture session, and therefore the user controls the capture tab. And in fact, this is in the API's own name, captured surface control. This is part of the captured, this is an API that affects the captured surface, not the preview tile. Now, the JS exposed object, which is uniquely mapped to the capture session, is, as we've mentioned, capture controller. And the rendering element is just an app implementation detail, and therefore, we should use the capture controller. And further, the user agent should not guess the developer's intent, because this can break, as I've demonstrated, and that was just one way it could break, but potentially other breakages are also possible. Next issue, issue number 67, my own summary again. The current shape of the spec employs internal slots in capture controller that are event handlers, and that may be JS observable in undesirable ways. So I responded to that on GitHub. I'll just repeat my answer here. Forwarded events are posted to a different tab, which implies a separate realm. A separate realm is going to have its own event loop. So I don't really think that there is anything JS observable here, but assuming there is, or even if there isn't, I'm willing to accept any PR that is going to improve the spec here and render this editorial issue done. Last issue, 69, my own summary again. What if the hit zone of the target element does not perfectly match the hit zone of the rendering element? Now here, I think that we can split it into two different cases. Case number one, benign applications. It's a bug. And this bug is trivial to catch and to fix because layout is the bread and butter of web development. Super easy to fix. But if we're thinking about malicious applications, I would say a couple of things here. Number one, we deem this, the current limitation sufficient to ruggedize this against abuse, because you need permission to initiate the tab capture, you need permission to initiate captured surface control. We don't think it's a problem, but we are open to discussing additional limitations in the spec. And I would also point out that user agents are always free to employ their own additional limitations beyond the spec as they deem necessary. So thank you very much for listening, and I guess now it's probably the time for joint discussion, right?
Yes, thank you. We are actually early on time. So thank you for that presentation. I think everyone now has heard two views of where we are in GitHub. So I think that is very helpful. I do wish that we would have had UN as the third active interested party here to look at this, and hopefully he'll be able to view this presentation in on his own time. And I think with that we can open up discussion here for now. As I feared, yeah, that it sounds like there aren't a lot of other opinions on this, so it might just be that we'll have to continue discussion between us. I did have some comments on your presentation, Alan. My main objection, and I think we thank you for doing a good job of outlining the two views. I think that's pretty accurate. My concern with the existing API is that it's too powerful and too complicated, because it does allow, it gives the website more control and more power than it needs to achieve the illusion that it wants. And basically it requires the website to then build the illusion, because the user agent is no longer in charge of the illusion. You also said earlier that the user interacts with the captured tab. I think that's confusing to say, because I don't think that's true, because when you say that, someone might think that what you mean is the user goes and finds the original tab and interacts with it, which is not what's happening there. I believe what you're saying would be more accurate to say that the user interacts with a vision of the captured tab, or a preview, if you will. And I agree. That's what I've been trying to say with the preview tile, is that if you take away the word tile, I think it's fair to say that the end user is interacting with the preview of the captured tab. And I would like the web developer to interact with the tile that provides that preview. And that seems like a logical place to put the web service. So there's the end user who's using the feature, and there's the web developer. And I think it's important to tie those components together, because if you think of it as a user agent feature, where the user agent now is doing a lot of the work of calculating coordinates, right? It doesn't make any sense to me that if you're going to have the user agent in charge of doing all these tricky calculations, that the elements the user agent is required to do those calculations on are totally modifiable by the web page to mess up independently of where the rendering happens.
Jennifer, you've made 3 different points, and I'm taking notes, but I'm afraid that other people might find it difficult to remember, even if I do. Can I start responding, or do you have more? Like we can pinpoint point by point, yeah. Maybe.
Well, that's my main point, that the API is too powerful, too complicated. Requires website to build illusion. It's limited to one preview. For instance, if you wanted to do a before and after that I explained, this would not support that. It doesn't work with touch events. And I think overall, the edge cases that you explained, I had a little trouble following why they didn't work. Why they wouldn't work with either API.
May I start responding?
Go ahead.
Okay, so thank you very much. You've made 6 points as I could count. I'm gonna try to respond to all of them, but after we do this one round, we should probably consider just going point by point and not 6 at a time. Point number 1 that I took down was preview, not captured. Yes, so you've claimed that that the user actually interacts with the preview tile. I think this is false, and the reason is that if you were to scroll to the bottom of a page and then you were to close the video conferencing application, you're going to find that when you go to the previously captured tab, it's going to still be scrolled to the bottom of the page. So you have actually modified the captured tab. So the correct model, thank you. The correct model is that you are interacting with the capture tab and that you're affecting it and you're potentially changing state there. And for example, if you're scrolling Google Maps, then by scrolling in and out, you're going to zoom in and out and you're going to find yourself on a completely different part of the globe after that. So that's point number 1. Point number, I'm going to reorder them just to keep the one that might take the most. Yeah, sorry.
Should we maybe you're right. Maybe we should respond to each one and discuss each point. And thank you for writing them down. I would say that I don't think we disagree about behavior here. It's more about language. That I would say that you're interacting with a vision of the captured tab, not the captured tab directly, because these are 2 different ways to locate them. So yes, we're talking about a forwarding mechanism here. So obviously, by interacting with the vision of the captured tab, you are modifying the captured tab. But that doesn't mean we can't be clear in language when we say that user agent sees a vision of the captured tab that is embedded in the video conferencing website, and they interact with that. Whatever you call that is a preview, right? We agree.
Okay, so if this were just about spec language, of course, I would not put up a fight. The issue is that you're presenting this distinction as the rationale for choosing one API shape over the other. And that's why I'm compelled to disagree with you, because I think that the correct thing is to expose this over capture controller for multiple reasons. For example, captured media capture transform, sorry. And there are other reasons. So this is just one more reason. So I think that, of course, yes, I'm biased, but I think that my reading of the situation is more compelling because you are modifying state in the capture tab, not in the preview tile. The preview tile is completely oblivious of the changes you've made there. Once you forward the gesture, there is no state that remains different in the preview tile, but the capture tab might take that change of state indefinitely long into the future.
Oh, I don't disagree with that. But the problem is that in your API, in my API, there's a requirement that the web page make an effort to display what the user is interacting with so that they can see that they're scrolling. And that's what's missing in your API. There's nothing in your API that requires the website to display anything, as far as I can tell.
Just to clarify on methodology here, it could be that I'm right on this point, but I could be still wrong on the overall one. So if we want to change topics, let's declare this one concluded. But do we not agree that the user interacts with the capture tab? Because other arguments for exposing the API here or there, let's get to them. But we started with this one.
I think they're interacting with the representation of the capture tab, not the capture tab itself. And through interactions with that representation, they end up modifying the capture tab that way. It's like saying a picture-in-picture is the original window. Like we understand. We should be able to talk about these things and be clear about what they are.
I'm only insisting that we use the correct language and that we correctly reflect reality because you present this as an argument, as an actionable point.
I do.
If you don't, so it's not wordsmith. If it's actionable, it's not wordsmithing. It's a substantive issue.
Well, it sounds like you're making an argument that because they're modifying the captured tab, the right API is the capture controller.
No, that's a step too far. That's a bridge too far. What I'm saying, I'm contradicting your argument. You claimed that this is a feature of the preview tile, and because of that, it needs to be exposed on either the video element or the canvas element. Admittedly, this was only one of several reasons you had for that. And I'm only on counterpoint number one. So I'm only now, I'm trying to break down all of the arguments. This is just the first one. So have I succeeded in countering this particular argument?
I think we should move on to the other arguments. I think we have to agree to disagree here.
Very well. Touch events you've mentioned, and I would like to say that this can, of course, that's a lovely follow-up that we should explore in the future. Limited to one preview, again, we have, this is not part of the multiple different representations of the same capture tab, has never been discussed as part of the MVP, or at least never been agreed as part of the MVP. But should the need ever arise, it's a very straightforward extension in the future. So until I suggest that we just tackle that when the need arises.
Well, so I presented a set of limitations here that I think the API, as proposed, does not hold up.
I would like to get to these points. I was trying to get rid of the easier points first.
Well, I think that's an inherent limitation, is that Normally, when we add features like capture stream, we add it to the element that is relevant. And I think in this case, you sort of, it sounds like you're saying that the presentation of the capture tab is irrelevant, and that's the weakness in the API. And you also have, from a web developer ergonomics perspective, you have an API surface that works completely different depending on whether you have an overlay or not. And I tried to make the argument that overlays are a general problem, not unique to capturing of tabs. So I think that the desire to solve the overlay case has actually warped the API surface to where it works vastly different depending on whether you have an overlay or not. And so that's what I've been arguing on the issues, that the user agent, we should at least get to an agreement that the user agent needs to know where the presentation is to do the right job.
Jennifer, thank you very much. I think there is a bit of a methodological problem here because you presented 6 different points. I'm trying to get to them one by one. I tried to start with specific ones, and you jump to the next ones that I want to address. I just deemed them to be a bit more complicated, so I left them for last. So if we could just, like right now, we're talking about the 3rd point, which is limiting to one preview.
Yes,
you've raised that as a limitation of the API. Regardless of the other 5 points, is it possible to discuss this particular point in isolation? Otherwise, I could try. I could go and counter all 6 all at once, if you prefer that.
Well, I'm not sure that this format is necessarily helpful. We have a large group of people, but please present your cases why you think the limitation here is adequate.
I don't think it's adequate. I think that the limitation to one preview is just an artifact of the API shape that stems from the fact that we've not tried to solve that. Now, it's it's a trivial solution, right? Instead of saying forward wheel, you could add wheel forwarder, right? And then you can accept multiple elements. And then you can have remove wheel forwarder where you remove that. But because we don't actually have any known application that wants this, I suggest that we don't burden the developers that would need to use a more complicated API. The implementers.
API.
Sorry?
A less complicated API.
No, if you want to add and remove, that's more complicated.
Add and remove. No, my proposal does not have these limitations, and it's simpler.
So to make my argument again, what I'm claiming is that although my current API shape limits to one preview tile from which or to one element from which you forward, and that is a limitation, and that is not a necessary limitation, but I think it's a useful limitation for practical reasons, because to remove that limitation is possible while keeping the general thrust of my API shape, but it is not useful. It levies costs on web developers, on implementers, and on us, the people who specify this API, and it does not help anybody. So while I currently have forward wheel, I could have add wheel forward, remove wheel forward, right? And that would solve that issue. That one issue.
I'm sorry, that's just a straw man, right? So you're saying your API could be modified in some way that you're proposing to solve this use case. But that's not what I'm presenting. I'm presenting a wholesale different vision that doesn't have the same limitations. So you're saying that if you're saying your API surface would be adding lots of complexity in order to solve that same multiple preview case, that's an argument against that API, not an argument for it. So that suggests that what I'm presenting is more logically following
you've made
a more natural fit. Right?
You've made 6 points, 6 distinct points about where you think my API shape is inferior to yours. And I want to go one by one and address each one. Now I'm conceding one. So in one of them, I say, yes, I have chosen explicitly to make that a bit more limited. I'm granting you 1 point, but I'm saying that's a conscious decision. And that's a conscious decision that can very easily be reversed in the future while keeping. So I'm claiming that it's not a true weakness of my API shape. But just a second, maybe I've made a mistake here. Maybe it's more interesting to address the more significant points first, okay? Because I see that we're really not going through the simple ones as quickly as I suspected. So should I just jump to the most significant ones instead?
Sure.
Okay, so you've claimed that my API shape is too powerful, whereas yours intentionally limits the web application, and that is desirable. Is that a correct characterization of your main argument?
Yes.
Awesome. So let's address that first, and apologies for trying to address the other ones first. What prevents us from specifying the exact same limitations on my API shape so that it would equally limit the web application as your API shape?
That's a good question, and also why I filed multiple issues to focus and separate out the issues based on behavior, both for coordinates and for input consumption. And I think that's a flaw in the spec right now, that it's not specified well what the behavior should be. So I would love to agree on behavior, and I think I was hoping that we could agree on the behaviors first. And once we have those nailed down, it is true that you could have you could nail down those behaviors in regardless of, and API. We could discuss behaviors and API separately.
Okay.
Effectively.
So,
yes, I agree. The question then becomes, once we've nailed down the behaviors, and my first question would be, do we agree on behaviors?
So,
That might be one good way to nail this down.
Let's look at this example, okay? We've got a potential web application with one canvas element that shows a capture tab at an offset, right?
Yes.
So do you agree that the scroll coordinates need to be relevant to the portion of the canvas element where the frame is drawn and not to the entire canvas element? Yes or no?
Agree. Yes.
Awesome. So what I'm claiming is, if you take the target element, and the target element actually defines that, okay, all you need to do is you scale relative to the target element, and then the user agent can very easily check that the target element actually fully overlaps a recent frame that was drawn of the capture tab, and that's a browser-specific limitation that any browser can implement. And once it becomes standard, we could even add that to the spec.
Well, so I claim that in my proposal, the user agent figures out this automatically by where the frame was rendered. It taints the canvas, both with locating the source, but also locating the determining the offsets.
Yes,
Now,
and here,
it sounds like in your proposal, the website has to change the overlay
absolutely
and to replicate that behavior. Is that right?
And I believe that I have foreseen that argument by you correctly, because that's why I put up this slide. Because this slide, if you look, the neon green is only one of two capture tabs drawn to this one canvas element. The second one is down in the red one. That's a second capture tab. Now, this is a single canvas element, and you want to forward from one portion of it, not forward from another portion of it. And my API shape allows the web application to specify that. It does away with the need of the user agent to guess.
Okay, so that's pretty clever, but it requires two capturing sources in the same canvas. Is that right?
Well, yeah. That's just one. That is what I deem to be the best example to show that. But the general principle that I was trying to make here, because I'm very, very strongly claiming this is not a typical use case.
I agree.
The general principle is that user agents should not guess unless they have to.
Well,
an API shape that obviates the need to guess does away with mistakes.
So in order to support this edge case, I agree this is an edge case where that would require your API to do well. I just don't think that this is a use case that we're been chasing right now.
I agree.
If we wanted to extend, if we want to have use cases for multiple capture surfaces composed into a single renderable surface, then I think we should explore that.
You have likewise. If I could just 1 second, I fully agree that this is not the most compelling use case. Likewise, you have not presented the most compelling use case for the case of multiple different previews and forwarding from all of them at the same time. But the principle remains that an API shape that would allow that, all other things being equal, would be preferable to one that does not. My claim is that an API shape that allows the web application to be explicit about the behavior that the user agent should expose is superior to an API shape that does not.
So, yes, to defend my position here is that I try to keep the use case as simple as possible, but I also was told that some of the requirements were so I also tried to include all the requirements that you and others had mentioned that you needed, which included not just a preview video element, but a preview canvas. And also in the future, let's also talk about using capture transform. So I tried to address those use cases as the most sophisticated needs you might have. So I'm coming from the approach of here's a simple API that can still handle a lot of tricky edge cases, including capture transform. The use case I used for capture transform would be you capture a web page, you capture a tab, and you do a transform that uses AI to translate the language, for instance. And you can scroll the original, say in English, and the other one in French, and either one scrolls both. Now that you could say that's an edge case as well, but that would be a case.
So just to clarify, you could make some simplifying assumptions in my example here to make it less edgy, and that is you could just have the same video twice, right? Like maybe the scrollable part on the left actually includes the very thing in the presentation. So it doesn't require that this be two different concurrent capture of two different tabs, and the principle remains that the web application needs a way of specifying that just a portion of the element is actually forwarding. Now, I'll give you one more example of this, okay? Imagine that you've got a canvas over which you draw it partially. In part of the canvas, you draw the preview, and in the other one, you've got all of the controls for the annotations, and then you put the annotations directly into that part of the frame. Now, we can go over and over this a lot, but I think I think this API shape is very demonstrably simple, and it receives less inputs than yours, which supports the claim that it's simpler. But admittedly,
well, I would say my API shape supports just a Boolean value by default. The option subject was there to allow extensions. Because it was deemed too simple. So.
I am sorry, but as I've mentioned in previous discussions about this topic, the Boolean option is actually a foot gun, because a web application that passes through today gets one behavior, and as soon as a new browser version comes out, all of a sudden, without alerting the original developers, while they're on vacation in Hawaii, all of a sudden, this starts behaving differently. And it could be that the web developers are going to be extremely pleased by this new behavior, but it could also be that it breaks their application. The correct way of structuring an API is that future future changes to behavior that are JS exposed should only be explicitly opted into by the developers.
Well, I don't necessarily. I think we have to agree to disagree on that one. Where I was hoping to make progress on aligning behavior, and both for coordinates and for input. If we can agree on that, I think the separate question of API. I was also interested in the compromise I proposed, which was that would it be a starting point to move the API to the video element in the canvas if we were able to pass in the overlay or controller?
Yeah.
And just to say, I find the capture controller API much more natural, and I would not want to move it to the video element and pass in the capture. I mean, in implementation terms, those are completely equivalent, and it feels much more natural to have it on the capture controller.
Okay, thank you for your view on that.
I saw Guido reaching for the button, but then I clicked. Guido, did I discourage you from going?
No, I was just going to say that Harald raised his hand. So
Well, it sounds like we're not going to be able to reach agreement here. So I think we've presented our cases well. I think we have some understanding of edge cases in both cases that we're not exploring right now, and I'm also hoping to get more feedback from UN to see where he lands on once he watches this presentation.
I think that we are exploring those alternatives. I think that we've been discussing them with you, and thank you very much for suggesting them. This discussion has been going on for several months, and everybody has been extremely engaged. So I think it would be incorrect to say that we're not exploring them. We're just failing to reach agreement.
No, I agree. I didn't mean to say we weren't exploring them. But I'm also wondering how much more progress we'll be able to make here with the whole working group, especially without UN, who's a major stakeholder on this, I think.
So if we could just let me try to list those points that you had again, and I'll just try. Let the record show responses to them. So number one, you mentioned touch events. I said that that this is a potential for a future extension. I hope that this is uncontroversial with you, but if so, okay. Just a second, one at a time. You've mentioned that the issue of the preview. I responded that no, it's the capture tab that is being controlled. I think that we've all given all of the arguments that we have there. You mentioned that this is limited to one preview. I've mentioned that either API shape can fix that, and that it is a conscious decision for my API shape to not currently address that, but that is very easy to rectify in the future if the need arises. So I do not perceive this to be a deciding factor between the two API shapes. I think that's a non-issue. You've mentioned. I know. You've given your points, and I'm giving my response. So you've mentioned that this API shape is too powerful. I asked why, and I've claimed, perhaps unconvincingly to you, but I'm still claiming that both API shapes are equally powerful or powerless, given the relevant browser-specific limitations, and that useful limitations of that sort can always be rolled into the spec in the future. You've mentioned coordinates, and I've mentioned that it is very possible for user agent and again, in the future, also others. So if we look, for example, at this example, it is very possible for the user agent to say, okay, assume for a second that the neon green box is, a transparent div that is the target element. You can make sure that it perfectly overlaps a recently drawn frame to the element, right? So whereas you would, your suggestion so far has been to take the coordinates of the entire element, I suggest that you can always take the coordinates of the most recently drawn frame on that element, and that you can do that at the user agent level, and that our API shape of taking a target element does not preclude that. That is my claim. Two more claims. No, sorry, only one more. And the edge case you said that you did not understand. I've explained it again. I hope that it is more clear now. You're muted.
Go ahead. You can finish your points.
No, that was the last one, and then I would like to give you back your time.
Okay, so can we go back to the slide where I described the behaviors, the coordinates?
Absolutely.
You said we could implement the same behaviors with the existing API surface. The problem, though, is that...
Am I at the right slide?
Yes, thank you. So are you claiming here that you would be able to implement the middle behavior here?
I think that anybody can implement that if they decide that that is the right thing to do. Now, you can take.
We don't. So the middle behavior is the one I would propose here. Can we agree on that, or do we disagree?
Let me try to double check that I understand that, because this is not the most. This is a bit information dense. Okay, so we could easily
yes
understand it differently. So
the gray area is a hit zone, and the red X is where the user clicks, and the line is the coordinates that are getting translated to the captured surface tab, which in this case I believe is Stack Overflow or something that might have iframes. So the coordinates of the click have to be translated correctly to the captured tab, so that where the mouse pointer. If the mouse pointer is directly over the rightmost tab in Stack Overflow, it should scroll the right part. If it's slightly to the left, it should scroll the left part. And my point with this diagram is to show that all this user agent logic has to be based on where the presentation is, basically where the frame is rendered inside the preview tile, in order to get the right idea. The problem with your API shape is that from looking at it, you would naturally assume that it works the way on the left. So
let me give you my initial reaction here, but a bit non-committal, because this is a complicated subject and I'm thinking on the fly. Okay. So first of all, I don't think that we need these limitations in the spec. I think that they should be browser specific, at least initially. And I think that the correct set of limitations for any browser to implement is actually that the so-called overlay object, for you it's the overlay object, in my API shape it is the target element, that needs to be either perfectly aligned with the preview, or it needs to be a complete subset of it. This example is a bit confusing, because you've got portions that are over the preview, portions that are outside the preview. The two things are it's like, and then everything gets misaligned, and I cannot easily understand why anybody would choose to do that. And personally, if an API were implemented in a way such that this behavior just gave any kind of result, I would not care, because I would consider it a web application bug. I think the interesting case is when you've got a preview element, a rendering element over a subsection of it, potentially all of it, potentially an actual subsection of it, you draw a preview, and then you take the target element and that overlaps that portion. And what the user agent can do is therefore see that the bounding box of the target element perfectly matches the last drawn frame on that preview tile.
Right. So you're right that this drawing purposely offsets the overlay so that we can observe what the actual behaviors are in the edge cases of the API. So this was done to illustrate that the existing API seems to assume that the website is doing a lot of alignment to create the illusion. And this is
I object to the word illusion here. Everything is an illusion.
That the user is interacting with the preview.
Well, it's not an illusion. That's the mechanism by which you produce that effect. Everything I see right now is an illusion. All of these pixels on the screen in front of me are not real. I'm seeing your face. You're not in the same room with me. This is not an illusion. This is the effect.
So this is a problem of specificity and edge cases. If we're only going to look at the case where the preview tile and the overlay match exactly, we're not going to be able to infer what behavior the API actually holds if those things ever move around. And it sounds to me like the existing behavior of your target element is going to behave like the one on the left, because it has no concept of where the actual preview is happening. So it's a different API, not just an API shape, but also in behavior. So this is the issue 69 that I filed, so that we can nail down behavior. I'm hoping to make progress on that, because it's not clear from the existing spec what the behavior actually is.
So the behavior that I suggest is that you always just take the target element and you calculate relative coordinates, because you could even be like one thing you've not explored here is that you could even change the aspect ratio, right? Like the overlay could be extremely narrow too. So there are a lot of ways that this can not match. And what I'm suggesting is that you could have browser-specific limitations that say, hey, this looks suspicious, probably buggy, let's not do anything. And this could eventually be rolled into the spec if they're found to be useful. But initially, you just need something that's useful for a properly functioning, reasonable application. And such an application would have the target element in alignment with a portion of the actual preview tile, and probably the portion of the preview tile where the preview is actually drawn.
So I think we have 4 minutes left. I think we have to just summarize here that we have different views on which API shape and which behavior is better. I hope we can nail down the behaviors and continue that on GitHub. Any other final comments you have?
No, thank you very much for your interaction here. I forgot the word, but you know what I mean. Thank you very much for engaging.
Thank you, you as well. And I think with that, I think we're at the end. Do you want to go to the last slide? Do we have any more slides? Just making double sure that we didn't drop anything. All right, that's it.
Okay. No resolution.
All right.
I noticed
No
that
resolution.
we have had no input from anyone outside of Jan Ivar and Google folks.
Correct. Yes. We do hope that Ewan. It was unfortunate Ewan wasn't here. I think we should look to GitHub for feedback from him.
And we'll have to warn web developers that if they don't show up at the meetings, they won't be heard. It doesn't seem to help, but that's the fact.
Right.
Okay. See you later.
Thank you. Bye.